Please welcome the Head of Customer Success at Habu, Ted Flanagan, and the Senior Manager of Digital Demand Generation at ASICS Digital, a subsidiary of ASICS Corporation, Philip Bryant. Please be aware that there will not be an audience QA for this session.
Thanks, Natalie. And Phil, I'm really excited to be able to present on this topic with you here today because I think it was about a year ago, ASICS being one of our very first customers, our sort of work with you started, I think in your words, as a bit of a skunkworks project. And as we were looking ahead to the next year, I remember you saying, listen, if this is ever going to graduate from skunkworks, the only way that's going to happen is if we can address some of the measurement challenges that ASICS is looking to investigate. And so real excited to be talking about how we're reimagining measurement using data clean rooms, and appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excited to be here.
Great. And so we won't belabor some of the points around the trends that are driving this shift. I think they're well known to everybody in the audience, but ultimately, so much of our historical approaches to measurement were predicated on access to granular user and impression level data. And just as we move forward, that data is increasingly on lockdown. It's a function of privacy regulation globally and in the States. It's the posture of the major platforms in terms of what they'll allow both from a business interest and then technology changes that they're ushering in around cookies, identifiers, et cetera. And then there's the fact that so many brands have already made their major investments in their own first party data and have moved that to the cloud in their own environments. And they're reticent, for good reason, to see that data move from their first party environment. All of that creates a situation where as a company looking to measure marketing performance, our access to that data is more strained than ever. And it doesn't just sort of break our measurement process, it breaks a lot of the existing tools and processes that we built to power data-driven marketing end to end, from planning, targeting, measurement, modeling, all these things that sort of were predicated on the union of customer data with campaign data, with conversion data to power these sorts of analytics are just increasingly impossible given the privacy climate, which is ultimately a good thing because it reduces our risk. It reduces sort of the kinds of sort of bad actor things that have been making headlines in the industry. And where a lot of that access to consumer data has now moved is to data clean rooms. And sort of we define that as generally a cloud-based environment where privacy and governance controls are strictly enforced, can run on any cloud. Identity resolution is often integrated, but really it's about controlled access to data following sort of privacy by design principles. And we've seen sort of adoption of this kind of technology really accelerate, starting with these walled gardens adopting this as a method for making campaign data available, to now many major publishers, retailers, brands looking at the technology as a way of potentially accessing some of that data that they had begun to lose access to. So Phil, I was curious, sort of, you guys were really one of our first partners in investigating what's going on in this market. How did ASICS think about these shifts and your own evaluation of new technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, as advertisers, we're always stuck between what we want to measure ideally and what we can measure in the given circumstances or under the given scenario. So, and now more than ever, do so in a privacy compliant way. So when we think about our measurement at ASICS, you know, I think we've really kind of moved away from going all in on one type of solution and really push our teams and our teams' thinking to be more flexible, more nimble, and really think about what is the next, what is another methodology, or what is the next methodology that we can test. So we also understand we need multiple approaches. So, you know, for clean rooms, I think, you know, looking at this chart here in 2017, that's really when we first started to hear about clean rooms as a topic in general, but there really wasn't too much that we could use at the time. You know, I think the platforms were pretty early. And so we really only started to get actively involved in about the 2019. And so, you know, without us having too much experience or any experience in this, it's been really helpful to lean in on a partner such as you all, who's really kind of leading the charge in this space. And at the same time as well, against this chart, we've seen that those tech vendors, which again, back in 2017 was not much more than a couple press releases, have really been advancing their capabilities and their data collaboration processes, which makes it a lot more practical for us. So, it's a very exciting space where we're really just scratching the surface. And, we appreciate that this is one of those things that we're on the horizon, but now, it allows for the granularity that we're looking for, but does so in a privacy compliant way. So we're very excited.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting, right? And I think no matter what, one of the things that we've learned, it's something we've seen in our work with you, is that there is no direct translation of the old way of doing something like measurement into these new technologies, because frankly they don't operate the same way. Many of us at Habu had come from a background in data management platform space, and like MTA, those kinds of tools were predicated on centralizing as much data as possible, tying it to resolving identity to a single user, whether that was through third-party cookies or device identifiers, matching, and then ultimately running a lot of processes and analytics on top of third-party infrastructure. And when we think about things like MTA, they followed much the same model of sort of data centralization and create this single source of truth. Go forward, it's a much more decentralized and distributed problem. We talk a lot about distributed data because the notion of centralizing, unifying data, resolving all this campaign or conversion or customer data down to a single user really is something that's increasingly impossible. And so what you're ultimately doing is think of the old story of the blind man and the elephant. You get different pieces of the picture from different sources. And so that might mean working with your top retail partners to understand conversion in a set of channels, and then working with your top media partners in different clean rooms to understand campaign performance, running queries across these different environments and getting a view. So if the old way was all around sort of pixel and file-based transfer, increasingly, again, that user level data is really only accessed through technologies like clean rooms, if not clean rooms directly. Centralization has given way to things like multi-party compute. We do not think that ID resolution is going to be a realistic objective or aspiration across all data, because the reality is if users aren't consented, it isn't possible, and it should be. And so one-to-one is really going to be something that's done in context. And then outside of specific context, we're going to be working in aggregates and cohorts, geographic, something we've done with ASICS. And so all of that leads to this notion of taking more of a sort of portfolio approach to measurement. We talked about kind of having a full quiver of tools and approaches that we take. That means sort of mixing attribution-like analytics in clean rooms with experimental approaches, with traditional MMM approaches, modeling plus querying, working inside of different environments, all to sort of hopefully create a holistic view. But clearly, right, it's something that everyone is going to undertake a little bit differently, and it's created this real drive from our standpoint for different kinds of tools and talent. And again, so much of that legacy approach was sort of pixeling of creatives, and now all of that work that was happening from an ad op standpoint has now given rise to the need for people who can work in cloud infrastructure technology and who can move files and query data sets in AWS and in Snowflake and GCP, and not just teams that are comfortable working in those kinds of technologies, but the sort of analytic and data science talent who can author those queries, who can build models to reconcile what you see in channel A versus channel B. And so from a talent standpoint, and then from a tooling standpoint, working with these kinds of privacy preserving technologies, which create questions of their own when records are filtered out, and running across a multi-cloud analytics stack, and so many of those technologies being historically really built on data warehouse technology, like example Ads Data Hub and Google, built on Google's BigQuery. Well, that's great for our query-based analysis, but when we have to run models, we need a whole different set of tools. And so it really creates a challenge for companies on the resourcing side. And so I'm curious, Phil, from your standpoint, how is sort of ASICS both thought about, evolving its approach, and as you've thought about how you evolve your approach, what has that meant for the tools and talent in it that you need to bring together in the team?
Yeah, it's an interesting space and time. Historically, I think brands have always, there's kind of been a cat and mouse game where there's a new tool or a new shiny toy in the measurement space. Brands or small teams try to roll it out effectively across the entire organization before it becomes obsolete or before an external factor makes it non-viable. So from an investment standpoint as well, it really reinforces the need for us to not put all of our eggs into one basket and really look across the portfolio or the quiver, as you say. And so from a tool specific, it's also one thing for a small team, a small analyst team to adopt a new methodology, but it's a much larger organizational shift to change the entire organizational approach to marketing measurement. And that's really something that we're working through right now. And so internally, that shifts the conversation away from the tool itself, whatever it may be, as the solution, and instead get our teams to adopt this more agile mindset in terms of measurement that's still predicated on a few core principles. And for us, it's knowing that there is no silver bullet. There never will be, probably. So we have to test many and use multiple. 2 is privacy must be at the foundation. And 3 is that internal adoption and scale is almost more important than the exact accuracy of whatever solution or method. And so, from a talent perspective as well, we're a global company. We have brilliant data scientists and business analysts all across our organization. But it's challenging in terms of these evolution programs, right? This is the evolution of measurement. We can't always have dedicated data scientists assigned to our marketing programs and try to develop this process over time. And so that's where it's been particularly helpful to lean in on a partner such as you all at Habu to really work with us over a couple of years, over a few years, to mature our program as the times change. So it's a little bit of both internal and relying on partners such as you all.
Yeah, well, listen, I think we'll talk a little bit about the work now, because it's been something that we've really sort of we talk about kind of co-innovation with customers, and I think this has certainly been an experience that fits that description, because we've discovered along the way really what's working, what's not working from a measurement standpoint. I think we've, for example, started working in Ads Data Hub, and I think we've learned that there is a lot of value in that environment in terms of understanding direct buys data that's traffic within Campaign Manager. We can understand all of our direct buys, search. We've got all of the e-com data from ASICS.com, and so it's there's a lot of rich analysis that we can do to really replicate, at least across our Google ecosystem channels, things that look like very sophisticated approaches from an attribution standpoint. Similarly, we've talked about extending that into a channel like Amazon, right? Where another important e-commerce channel, where again, we have this mix of sort of upper funnel display and video and lower funnel search, sponsored products, sponsored brands. Now, of course, Facebook being a really important channel for you all, I think the next evolution will be looking at an environment like Facebook's advanced analytics. Again, these are the kinds of industry clean rooms where we can go in and replicate approaches like attribution and not simply last click, but right, fractional and algorithmic approaches that give us a much more comprehensive view of what's happening across your full mix in those channels. What'll be really compelling is when we continue to extend into more sales channels and working in wholesale and retail, and combining a greater coverage of your media mix with a greater coverage of your sales activity across all channels. And the reality is, I mean, I think you'd agree, Phil, right? We know that we're not going to, even if we're extending that coverage, the ability to reconcile what we see in one channel versus another is very hard when we're working in these clean room environments where, again, only an aggregate result can come out. And so we've complemented that approach with an experiment-based approach to really try to prove causation, to try or to calibrate or validate what we're seeing when we go do things like attribution looking backwards. And so that's where, again, sort of getting granular access through things like clean rooms to transaction data, using granular transaction data to create test and control populations, and then using those test and control populations. In our case, we did it really at a geographic level, to put a test control, a randomized control trial in market, and ultimately observe what happens over the course of the experiment period, the difference in sales between the test and control populations, and then ultimately run regression on the output of that data to determine lift and return on ad spend. I think that's been an approach that we've found to be really successful, which is really totally different from what we were doing inside environments like ADH. So we'd love to get sort of your take, Phil, on as we've tested with different approaches, look back analysis, experiments in market looking forward. What have you found? How are you thinking about it from a program standpoint with ASICS go forward?
Yeah, I think we're very bullish on clean rooms, and that's the topic. It's very exciting space, but we also still have to understand that we're still playing within some of the same constraints that we have, and largely when we talk about the walled gardens and the inability for data to cleanly kind of one-to-one connect between those platforms, we know that's not going to change, and so we're still stuck with that. And so clean rooms on their own is a very critical path or part to our measurement program, but we can't just rely on clean rooms. And that's exactly what you're talking about here. We need to add a layer, which is kind of bridging the data across, in aggregate, across the different clean rooms. And so, we do really love the granularity. We can do deep dives within an ADH or within an Amazon. But again, if we're looking at holistic measurement, and we're looking at a long-term practice, we need to have that level of connection. And so, this is where we're doing this experimentation, which has been really exciting. And I think, as you said, it's more about validating our models, right? We can do things in specific silos, and that helps validate the overall model. So that's what we're excited about right now. We're excited to open up new data clean room, potentials, and then how do we add those new single channels into this, this suite of measurement that we're working on right now. So, and lastly, doing so in a way that we can deploy it globally. Again, it's one thing for me and my team to do it in one market, one small test, or one test in Europe. It's much more to kind of bring this to scale across 20 plus countries that we operate in and countless different business units. So that's the next step after we develop this methodology.
Yeah, I think, and we'll sort of get to the key takeaways here in a second, but I'd agree entirely. I think it's one of the things that I think is still really we're discovering on our side, both with you and with some of the other customers and brands that we work with, is as we find success with some of these individual tactics, right? Okay, here's a very interesting query that tells me something that I didn't know before about what's happening within my Google investment. Or here's a great experimental tactic that seems to give me a really good proof point on lift. How do we combine them sequentially across different business units and geos to really have that sort of holistic program? I think that's part of the creative work that's still happening. And I think, again, as we sort of wrap with just some key takeaways from today, the game's changed. I think everybody here in the audience knows that and is here. We're all testing new tools and approaches. We do think clean rooms are going to be one arrow in the quiver or two arrows in the quiver, but there's going to be a lot of other things there too, which is the point around not being there not being no one silver bullet, which is a point you've made, and we agree with 100%. And so, how can you also be really agile with your tools and technology and your so that you can have that combined portfolio-based approach. And then finally, figuring out sort of what's working and being really deliberate about scaling and operationalizing that so that we can drive value at scale, adoption, something that you mentioned earlier. So agree 100%. I think ASICS is on the right path, and appreciate you sort of going down that journey with us, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a great experience so far, and excited to what's to come.